Hello and welcome to She the People's Women Writers Fest. This is our second edition for 2021. The Women Writers Festival, now 5 years into its existence, has been traveling across the country, and during the lockdown had the opportunity to also travel around the world and bring you many international speakers talking about the writing that they're doing, the way they're doing fearless authorship, the kind of routines they're following in the lockdown for writing. So it's been a fascinating journey curating and building the Women Writers Festival. The co-curator for this festival in March is Deepa Chakravarti, and we have brought in many different aspects of feminist writing to the fore, especially women who are picking up subjects that are very relevant to our times, the ones that are making headlines, the kind that make us uncomfortable, the kind that raise questions about who we are and where we are going. The first session today is about telling feminist stories, and I have three very powerful authors with me. I've got Ghazala Wahab, who has written Born a Muslim, a book that I'm thoroughly enjoying reading, which is very powerful, and it really does make you think about the way communal harmony is supposed to be in India and where we are going as a country that has always claimed to be diverse. Sudha Menon has, I don't even know how many books to her her writing now. I'm sure she'll know the number, but from Devi to She Devil to Feisty Over 50, and of course, Legacy of Fathers and Daughters, many amazing books, and she's been writing about women-centered subjects for many months and years. Also on the show, Deepa Narayan, who's now a podcaster with a podcast called What's a Man? And she's also got a very powerful book under her sleeve called Chup, which essentially literally translated in English means silent. Stories of women and why they choose to stay silent. I'm your host today and also the founder of Women Writers Fest and She the People. I've authored Feminist Rani among many books, and hopefully this year I'll have a surprise book for you by the end of 2021. So delighted to kick off the Women Writers Festival, March 2021 edition. I'll first go to Ghazala. Ghazala, looking at Born a Muslim, covers many subjects. But first off, why did you choose to write the book now?
I'll start with a small detail about Islam. The Prophet of Islam, he was born in the 6th century. He died in the 7th century. And the first chronicle, or the first account of his life, appeared almost 100 years later, or more than 100 years later. And it was more or less a hagiographic account written by somebody called Ibn Ishaq. That was the first time somebody had written about him, and that was the first written account of his life. So all the subsequent accounts which have appeared in the Western press or in anywhere else in the world, the source material is Ibn Ishaq's biography. Now, Ibn Ishaq was a devout Muslim. He was greatly in love with the Prophet, and his account is very laborious in parts because he goes on and on praising the Prophet. But his source materials were all secondary source materials because obviously it was being written a century later. So now when people talk about the Prophet, actually there is no other source available to talk about him. Despite that, in the last few years, through WhatsApp messages, through forwarded emails, I used to get a lot of very strange kind of details about Prophet's life. And I used to wonder, where are these coming from? I mean, considering the original source which chronicled his life does not mention this. So where are these details coming from? That is how I got interested in the subject of Islam, though I was not brought up being tutored about Islam. I did not learn about it as an academic subject or even as a religion at home. So this is a consequence of the kind of stuff that I was encountering over the last few years, and that made me dwell a little more on the history of the religion, how it came about, how it spread, what was the original message, how it got disrupted by various means, and how it got distorted over the years. So that was the original basis of building this book.
So the book also deals with many issues of our times, which is, of course, currently in India being a majoritarian government, and also looking at the kind of psychological and emotional impact on the Muslim community. I'd like you to elaborate on, let's say, the themes that you've picked that make connections with our present.
See, I have tried to put the book in a place where both Muslims as well as non-Muslims can access it in a easy to read manner. So while I'm covering a lot about the current status of Muslims in India, where do they live, how do they live, what is their employment profile, education profile, I'm also looking at how it came to India and how this manner of it coming to India, whether it was through traders or through Sufis or invaders, how it impacted upon the region where these people had access to, the immediate access. So whether the Sufis had access to, let's say, the Hindi heartland, UP, or parts of Bihar, parts of Madhya Pradesh, or the invaders had access more to Punjab or northern parts of India. Traders had access to the coastal belt of India. So the kind of Islam which developed in these regions also depended upon the way it came to India. So I have tried to bring that in the book. I have also looked at issues of, there's a chapter on Muslim women. So I have tried to look at the issues of Muslim personal law. I have tried to look at the issue of FGM, bail, and things like that. Then Islamic sects and how the movement of preaching of Islam, evangelical movement, how it was different from the various sects that it developed, and how India has been the crucible in which a very independent kind of Islamic thought and philosophy developed. The religion, the origin was from Arabia, but in India, the thinking about how Islam has to be preached, what kind of Islam we want to preach to people, the modern ideas, the archaic ideas, the ideas of combining religion with politics, all this kind of developed in India. So actually, India has been, in terms of the intellectual growth of the religion, India has been a very important center of that development as well as that learning.
Okay.
So
I'm going to come back to you I'll come back to you in just a bit on talking more about what you've written about Muslim women and looking at the kind of stereotypes in terms of expectations people have. But I want to just bring in Sudha and Deepa. Sudha, to you, last few years you have pretty much year after year put out a piece of feminist work. Telling stories of women. Now, of course, you've done Feisty over 50 some time back. What's next for you? What's the story that's occupying your mind?
Funnily enough, and very, very importantly enough for me, like I always say, that it is important for women to tell their stories. And part of how women tell their stories is through also the way they live their lives. And my next book, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this, but my next book is a beautiful memoir of growing up with my mother's food. And it is a story of how a woman finds herself through the food she cooks for her family. And it is part memoir, it's part documentation of the kind of food that women cook in their homes. And, I discuss it. It is strange how when we talk about feminism, in some ways we have come to a place where when we say, oh, I write about food, it's immediately, you're not good enough. That's why you're writing about food. The last book I wrote was this book called Feisty at 50, Shaili. I think you must have read parts of it because we discussed it at the last Writers' Festival. I wrote that book because I wanted to tell my story as a woman of 50 and how I refuse to fall into a box and stay there because I'm 50. Society expects me to just disappear into the woodwork because I'm not relevant enough. I've done all my roles and now I have to just retire and maybe look after grandchildren or whatever. Nothing wrong with looking after grandchildren, but my message in that book is don't box me and don't try to contain me because I'm a woman and I'm unstoppable. And age is just really, even though it's a cliche, age is just a number. So I've always believed we have to say our lives as we live it. And what I've always found is that when a woman tells her stories, it makes people uncomfortable because she says when a woman writes her stories or tells her stories, it's not just a story about her, it's a story of society. It holds up a mirror. It shows people gender dynamics. It shows people what the relationship of a man and a woman is, how it can be labeled, what is a woman's place in that society at that particular point. So it makes people uncomfortable. And so it's very, very easy to then say, oh, that's chicklit. You know, feisty at 50 is chicklit. It was not. What is chicklit? When a woman writes a story, it's chicklit and it's not intelligent. And therefore, don't read it or read it and then make fun of it. It hurt me in the initial period when people said that feisty at 50 is chicklit. And then my inbox started filling up with emails from women across the ages, women who are 20 and 50 and 80 saying how reading it liberated them from all the things that they thought they shouldn't do. All those little judgments that we make about a woman, I wrote about all of that. And I'm so glad that my publisher at that point brought into that story and said this story needs to be told, because far too often we just think this is how it is meant to be and that's how we should live our lives. So I'm just wanting to say that women's writing is not chicklit. I'm sorry, it is relevant and it's important to say.
Okay, great, Sudha. Deepa, thanks very much for joining us. Straight up to the point that we are all discussing, this tendency to box women writing or box what they might write itself is the biggest, stereotype authors, women authors are stuck with.
Well, I think everyone on this show is breaking those stereotypes. I, as a woman, I'm now writing about men, something that men have always done, writing about women. And I must say, so far, I haven't gotten any pushback. It's been a lot of fun talking to over 250 men to gather material for. I thought I'd reverse the order and not write a book first, but put the research out and get reactions. And it's been marvelous. So, yes, I think we need to keep expanding our own repertoire and pay less attention to what people say.
What's been your experience with experimenting audio? And tell us more about What's a Man podcast.
It really, I wrote this book, Chup, a few years ago. And when I was doing research on that, I've been focusing on the educated middle classes, middle and upper classes, primarily because most of my life I focused on poverty and poor people. And when I started looking at gender issues, I felt that if the middle classes, if we change, then change sort of spreads and we're not stuck in the survival battle that poor people are stuck in. And so because of COVID and because I'm a slow writer and because I write to bring about change, I said, why not first put the research out in the form of a podcast, which I know nothing about. And so it's been a very, very steep learning curve from what kind of a mic do you use? How should your voice sound? Basically, I haven't been able to modulate it, but I do know about mics. I do know about editing for audio, which is actually very different from editing for a book. And it's been stressful, but it's also been fun. And I think the most exciting part is that people are listening to the audio, because I think audio, even when I read a book, it's a different sense that engages. But
Yeah.
voices, I find voices of young children, for a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old, hearing him actually say something, or a 39-year-old man actually saying that, I have these problems with my wife or at my office, it has a different impact. And
Sure.
it's really been fun exploring that modality.
So, to those of you who've just joined in, we've got Ghazala, Wahab, Sudha, Menon, and Deepa Narayan talking about writing stories about women by women. Also, now asking and researching men and finding what their perspectives are, because in this journey of getting gender equality in place, it's important that we are inclusive and also get men to do some of the work that they couldn't have done all these years. That would be lovely. So Ghazala is the author of Born a Muslim, and we're to the point where we're discussing what are the various expectations, stereotypical expectations, potential readers may set when they read a book like yours, which is Born a Muslim, when they think of Muslim women. What kind of research did you do, Ghazala, and what have you presented in your book?
Actually, like any other Muslim, even women is not a monolith body of in India or anywhere else in the world.
Yes.
The caste comes into this, that various sects come into the division of Muslim women. So the Shia women would have different sorts of issues, the Sunni women will have different sorts of issues. But what kind of unites all of them is the patriarchal use or misuse of religion, and to use that to keep them under check or under control. So whether you have issues like limiting access of women to education, or insisting that if you step out in a certain attire, you have to cover yourself up in a particular way, or insisting on only a particular kind of education. Traditionally, a lot of Muslims thought that women should do women-specific learning, whether it's in the medicine, and medicine has been a very important field for women because they want more and more women doctors, so that women do not have to go to male doctors. So education has been medicine has been one area where Muslims have encouraged more and more women to go out and study, not engineering or not anything else. This determination or this predetermination of what kind of exposure women should have, has this choice has been traditionally not theirs to make. This choice has been made by the male members of their families, whether their fathers or brothers or subsequently their husbands. So I think this is one factor which unites women, Muslim women, and I suppose all women in India also, where your decisions or your choices are made by other people. So this is one thing which I have discovered, that though we like to talk about Muslim women and problems specific to Muslim women, by and large, these are the problems which most women of a certain social economic strata face in India.
Deepa, how important has it been for your research during Chup to recognize that actually, indeed, we can't tell women's stories as women's stories because they aren't common at all in most cases. There are shared problems, but different women from different caste, class have those problems exacerbated in a way that the others can't even recognize. So just some insights into how your research played out during Chup.
Right. I actually take a slightly different approach. What interests me is not getting lost in the particularities of a particular. So I'm not telling the story of one woman. I'm interested in the patterns across women and across women in a particular class, which is why I focused, even though the middle class is not a monolith and the upper class is not a monolith, I really was interested in understanding if you have basic income, education, and you're employed, and you believe in gender equality, how do you behave? And so I was much more interested in really understanding everyday behaviors of women, despite the fact that they believe in gender equality. And what I found interesting is, of course, there were lots of differences and particularities, etc. But what interests me is, despite those differences, are there commonalities across women in living in cities um, that can bring them together? So, for example, the issue of voice or lack of voice, right? The issue of hesitating, even when you have the answer, you're not putting your hand up. Why is that happening? That seems to cut across. Now, not every woman, but enough women that I claim that the pattern of behavior. And then it becomes interesting to ask why, right? Because they know the answers. Why aren't they being able to say it aloud comfortably? So that's where that's what I find interesting, is to look at the surprises that come out and then try to understand why. So then it goes back to the early training. So the book is really divided into these tiny little micro behaviors that we don't see as important, how they aggregate and then leads to a behavior that we classify as dysfunctional or disempowering. So pleasing behavior, for example, it's common not just in India, but it's common in the US. You can see it. You could see it at the national level. You can see it in boardrooms. You can see it in families. So how it manifests differently, but the underlying phenomenon is pleasing. Girls being trained to please very early in very simple ways.
Yeah, constantly being likable. Yeah, big issue. We've been discussing that a great deal on sisterhood as well. Sudha, when you do go ahead and shape your books each time, how do you keep some of these issues in mind and steer clear of them in a way that you don't fall in the trap that we all have been conditioned to as writers?
I just think being authentic, that is very, very important. And like Deepa said, that we have been all told to be pleasant at all the times and not make people uncomfortable, not ask those questions that make people flinch and not want to be around you. I think I spent my entire life, I think I spent well into my early 40s being pleasant and nice and not asking questions. I was a journalist, so I asked those journalistic questions. But in my personal life, I just towed the line every single time. And when I look back now, I think it has been such a waste, and I think women's stories women should learn from their personal lives when they bring the universal stories that they bring to the table. And just my own example, I married my best friend when I was 21, and he was from another community, and my mother was mortified. And so I spent the first 10 years of my life trying to not be around. My mother eventually learned to love my then husband, and they were the greatest friends. They are the best friends even now. But the first 10 years of my marriage, so till I was about 32, I did not socialize with my family. I did not go to family functions where my mother might be embarrassed because her daughter has brought her, not legit kind of husband around. And then that marriage slowly disengaged. We continued to be friends, but we did not remain married. Then in my 40s, I married again. And again, my mother was mortified. And again, for the next few years, my husband spent the first 5 to 7 years of his married life with me being invisible. I said, no, you don't come for this event. It'll embarrass my mother or it'll embarrass my family. When I look back now, it is like the worst hypocrisy. I was on one side writing books about women and leadership and success and how women have to be, authentic. But in my personal life, I was not living that. And then one day I decided, no, this is enough. This is enough, and now I have to be who I am actually. And it is this thing that when women become assertive or when women are true to themselves, they're punished for it. And I was ready for that. And so I wrote Feisty at 50, I think, just to assert that, look, I am not that person anymore. And this is my truth, and you either accept it or deal with it. And I think that is what all of us, I think women are in many ways much more fearless than men, and they are able to say what they have to with much more assertion. And Deepa, I know what you mean when you say that women know their answers, but they won't put their hands up. Most of my work in writing has been about why women behave the way they do. And for me, I think it is what I read somewhere the other day, that the home is the nursery of patriarchy. I think Ratna Pathak said that on a She the
Yes,
People
she
fest.
said that.
And it was,
That's
yes,
right.
and it just resonated so much with me. And it is not that my mother is staunchly feminist. I don't know anybody who's more feminist than her, but she herself is a victim of conditioning, isn't it? She has been told for years that this is what women do, this is what we are expected to do. So she was just merely mouthing what she was taught. But I think the time has come to change that. And in my family, or at least in my nuclear family, I have set those not rules, but those parameters, right? My daughter will never suffer from the same thing that I or my mother did. And I think that's how change has to come.
Yeah, we're getting lots of questions, comments. I guess also I would say people are responding to some of the stories that each one of you are bringing on the table. One question is about the writing process, and I'll start that with Ghazala and go down the panel. Ghazala, how do you pursue your writing process? Do you follow a routine? This is your second book. How does it go?
No, I think I'm more instinctive when it comes to writing. I don't really follow a discipline. If I'm writing on a subject, I do a lot of reading before I start to conceptualize what I want to write. And while I'm reading, I sometimes take notes. Sometimes I just think about what I have read before. And sometimes I just read something randomly to take my mind off what I have read specific to the subject I want to write on, so that I have a clarity, or I have the benefit of distance from the subject that I'm writing on. So once I actually write, then I usually do not refer to too many notes, because I would have done my reading, I would have done my research beforehand. So when I sit down to write, I write more from memory, more from instinct. It's only when I need to clarify something or I need to verify something that I look up the notes or I look up my research material. But and then the process of writing happens in spurts. Sometimes I'm able to write even 2,000 to 3,000 words in half a day, and sometimes I just do nothing the whole day.
Yeah, I think I might be close to that. So I like what you said about being able to see your writing from a distance. I think that's very powerful indeed, because it's a great way to self-correct and self-review. Deepa, for you? I mean, writing in any form, I guess now podcast, writing it.
Right. No, it's my writing is very chaotic. I think the only thing that I have to do when I'm getting serious about writing is to say I'm going to write from such and such an hour and really block that time. But within that, then I just force myself to write and not worry about the quality of the writing. So it's more a stream of consciousness, and gradually it solidifies. And then I go back and pull out the gems. Otherwise, I would never get started. So I think if you want to be a writer, start writing. There's no magic to it. You have to write. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen automatically. And then gradually it improves. And so I've tried, because based on other people's suggestions, I've tried to come up with outlines and scenes and this and that, but it doesn't work for me. Not in the beginning. Later it does, when I start refining and see a plot or a storyline emerging. But I guess the most important thing is to start writing. The simplest.
Yes.
The shortest.
No, the shortest, yeah. At least make a beginning.
Right.
Okay, great. Just a quick, I always say this on the Women Writers Fest, and we've been saying it for years. So we do want people to know the books we're writing. We want you to go out there and buy those books. Tell us what you feel about them. So I'm going to go through all the authors and get them to tell you about their books in a brief way, so that you know what books they all have on the shelves. And next time you're online or in a store, make sure to buy their books. So Sudha, I'll go first with you.
This is my most favorite part of the
Okay, but we choose
so, okay.
not the whole list. We'll be here all day.
No. So no. So I think two books from my list that I would absolutely recommend, especially because we are talking about feminist stories. One, of course, is by Feisty at 50. It's for everybody. No, don't think it's only for a 50-year-old woman. It tells you what being a woman is and how ageist we have become as a society. And the second one, and a really interesting read for men too, and this is for sons, for fathers, for brothers, is Devi Diva or She Devil, and it's I tag it the Smart Career Woman's Survival Guide. It has amazing conversations with some very, very powerful, inspiring women, and please do read that up. Okay, I've kept my promise short.
Right. Ghazala, I know we talked about your current book, but what other books have you written?
I've written Dragon on Our Doorstep, which I had co-authored with my editor in the magazine, Force. This came out in 2017. So this book is basically about India's relationship with its two neighbors. And because we believe that our relationship with China can only improve if our relationship with Pakistan improves, because they are completely linked together. And all this can only happen if we resolve our underlying disputes or conflicts, mainly in Kashmir. So that is what my first book was about. That dwells a lot about on military equipment, a lot on military technology, a lot about new warfare, in addition to the boundary dispute as well as the Kashmir dispute. And this book, Born a Muslim, is my first book as a solo author. And as I said right in the beginning, I have tried to place this book in a manner that both Muslims and non-Muslim readers should find it interesting. I have tried to kind of build a bridge between both readers so that the misconceptions they have about each other can be dispelled.
That's a very important discourse that we need. So I'm actually delighted that we have you here. Deepa, what's lying ahead for you? I mean, Chup has been an amazing book. What else?
The research that I've done that's fed into the podcast it's in the public domain. I would love to hear from anyone who listens to it and what strikes you, because that's going to be the basis of my next book on masculinity. It really follows the themes of power and love through men's lives, and starts with very basic stuff. And what does it mean to be a man today? Men's own definitions, and it really unpacks what is power. What does power mean to men today, and how does it define them? And it's really surprising it was really surprising for me to see that even strong feminist men have very traditional definitions of power, which collides completely with any definition or any possibility of deep feminism. So it's all these contradictions that are coming out, and not to judge them, but if we can present it and share it, then we can see how we can move forward, because this competitive macho power is everywhere, whether it's in sexuality or whether it's in father-son relation. It's everywhere, right?
Indeed.
And yet men are saying we don't want to be like this. So how do we change? How do we shift? So I think that'll be I'd love to hear from people on how this book should be written, what should be in it.
Absolutely. And I think, Deepa, some of the works that you're doing on masculinity will be aligned with what She the People has recently launched, called Male Champions of Gender Equality. It would be fab for us to connect with you on that front and see, how we all can together change the discourse. So
wonderful.
For my part, for those of you who've not read Feminist Rani, I co-authored that with Meghna Pant. Go check it out. It's a quick read. Also, When I Was 25, that's another book about leaders in their 20s. And I am not at, I'm not permitted to tell you what the name of my next book is, but expected, I guess, 2021, 22. That should unleash the power of women in an economy. So that is going to be a bit of an academic effort at seeing what women are up to. I really appreciate Deepa, Ghazala, Sudha for joining us here at the Women Writers Festival in March. Thank you very much for your valuable insights and also for writing the work that you do. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Great
much.
to be with
Nice.
everyone. Thank you, Shaili.
Thank you very much.
Take care.